Celebrating 46 years on the air, award-winning Farmweek is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.
Today on Farm Week, as we edge closer to the end of the year, more on a possible shutdown in January. Plus more on trade. What did Biden and Xi talk about in their meeting? In Southern Gardening, just in time for the Christmas season, poinsettias in all their glory. And in our feature, an encore, a new spin literally on an old technology, ag drones to the rescue. Farm Week starts right now.
Hello everyone, I'm Zach Ashmore.
And I'm Mike Russell. Great to have you with us again here on Farm Week. Merry Christmas. It was just a couple of weeks ago we were hearing about a possible government shutdown before an extension was passed, sending lawmakers home early for Thanksgiving. But we're about to hear it all over again in January, though the deal did extend the Farm Bill for another year. Peter Tubbs has more.
The House voted to keep the United States government open for another 9 weeks.
On this vote, the yeas are 336, the nays are 95. 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
The continuing resolution was approved on a bipartisan vote, but creates another potential government shutdown in mid-January.
Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher.
The Senate put its stamp of approval on the bill and sent it on to the president's desk for a signature later in the week. Included in the stopgap spending bill was language that extends the 2018 Farm Bill for 1 year. The extension means that current government crop and price subsidies and programs will cover the 2024 crop year.
The positive is that the farmers will have the certainty of what they've had of the last 5 years of the 2018 Farm Bill, and that's obviously not as good as if they could look ahead 5 years of what the program is.
The exact terms of the now delayed 2023 Farm Bill are still being debated by both the House and Senate Agriculture committees. Among the contentious topics are additional spending on crop insurance subsidies for commodity crops. Roughly 2/3 of the price of crop insurance is paid by taxpayers, but many in Congress are asking for additional subsidies to encourage higher participation rates by America's farmers. Negotiators are also focused on changing the calculations at the heart of the agricultural risk coverage and price loss coverage programs. The two programs provide financial protections against substantial drops in crop prices or revenues and act as a safety net for a large percentage of U.S. producers.
And it was just recently that Joe Biden met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. That relationship is tenuous, though you wouldn't know it by public statements. Whatever you call it, it's complicated. Here's more from David Miller.
Representatives from the U.S. opened the American Food and Agriculture Pavilion at the China International Import Expo. As tourists and potential customers looked at the displays, nearly $1 billion in contracts were signed between Chinese buyers and U.S. producers. U.S. trade policy continues to focus on increasing trade with China. U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping got together in California for their first face-to-face meeting in nearly a year.
No misconceptions or miscommunication.
After the high-level talks concluded, Xi had words of cooperation and caution.
China never bets against the U.S., never interferes in its internal affairs. China has no intention to challenge or to replace the U.S. Instead, we are glad to see a confident, open, and prosperous U.S. Likewise, the U.S. should not bet against China. The U.S. should not interfere in China's internal affairs. It should instead welcome a peaceful, stable, and prosperous China.
During the 4 hours the two were together, they discussed combating illegal fentanyl and reestablishing military communications. Xi also met with U.S. business leaders who were hoping to get some clarification on what kind of trade might be possible as China expands its security rules. A group of Senate Republicans expressed concern ahead of the meeting, stating in part that there is no such thing as healthy economic competition with China, and that the United States should not throw any sort of economic lifeline to Xi after what they feel is the mess he made of the Chinese economy. Biden stressed the importance for peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits and objected to Beijing's non-market economic practices. While there was little talk of agricultural trade, the two men resolved to continue working.
We're in a competitive relationship, China and the United States. But my responsibility is to make this rational and manageable.
We're still hearing about drought, or at least the long-term impact, thanks to high temps over the summer. That heat created problems in preserving the one core resource farmers in California are desperate for: water. Once again, here's David Miller.
Nearly all of California is currently out of drought, but leftovers from previous dry periods have pitted neighbor against neighbor over water, with carrots being put in the crosshairs. Jeff Huckabee is president and CEO of Grimway Farms, a company in the middle of the fight.
You know, we're proud to be growing in the Cuyama Valley, grow some of the best carrots in the nation.
In 2014, California lawmakers changed from a hands-off policy for groundwater regulation and began requiring management plans be approved by the state. Officials with control of now overdrawn basins were some of the first people to develop plans for sustainability of their groundwater. Lee Harrington lives in the central California town of New Cuyama and is one of many farmers, ranchers, and others being sued by Grimway Farms and Bolthouse Land Company over the use of groundwater.
They're good farmers, you know, but the problem is they've been overdrafting ever since they've been here.
Grimway and Bolthouse initially supported the groundwater sustainability plan, but have since claimed other farmers are getting a pass, and 2 years ago filed a lawsuit against area producers. Officials with both companies want the courts to determine what they call a more equitable solution to a reduction in pumping that is fair to everyone in the basin.
Bottom line is, for the last 40 years, it was a huge pool, but now it's going down, and the pool's gonna be empty, so then they're gonna leave. And when they're leaving, they're gonna leave in this Dust Bowl.
We're going to adjust and work with, you know, whether it's the committees, the governments, whatever it has to reduce the water that's necessary so that we can all be here for a long time.
On the lighter side, you're probably already seeing a lot of these with the holidays coming up, and if you aren't, you will. But poinsettias aren't just Christmas red, they come in many other varieties too. Here's Eddie Smith with the colorful story.
Traditionally, red and white poinsettias are very popular holiday season plants. Did you know there are many more colored varieties available? Let's take a look at some of these beautifully colored plants. Autumn Leaves is a beautiful poinsettia with its bright bracts displaying a rich golden yellow with small pink flakes. The yellow and pink colors intensify as the bracts begin to mature. Gold Rush is a similar colored poinsettia, and you can see why. The bracts have a bold, bright golden yellow coloration. Premium Ice Crystal has large rosy red bracts with pale pink to apricot centers spotted in red. The pattern appears to be quite uniform, producing a beautiful ball of color. These plants have excellent branching and dark green foliage. Viking Cinnamon Poinsettia has large, creamy, yellow bracts with rosy pink spots. The short, broad bracts are held flat above the dark green leaves. Marble poinsettias offer a change to the standard solid colors. Ice Punch is my favorite. I love the reverse red bracts and white centers of Ice Punch. But now there's a pink version called Sparkling Punch. It has pretty pastel pink bracts with a creamy white streak down the center that stands out against the dark green foliage. If you like variegated plants, then you'll love Tapestry. This selection has grayish-green leaves with pale yellow margins and bright cherry red bracts. Look for these and other gorgeous poinsettias at your local garden center this holiday season. I'm Eddie Smith, and I will see you next time on Southern Gardening.
We'll take a break right here, but don't go away. Coming up on our Farm Week feature, it's a new-ish technology building on an old one, using drones to fight pests in the fields by delivering sterile insects to mate with them. It's a new spin on something called SIT. We'll meet the owners of a company who helped pioneer this biocontrol technique, who even designed their own drones just to make it work. That's coming up on Farm Week. Don't go away.
I believe in people and their hopes, their aspirations and their faith. I believe in my own work and in the opportunity I have to make my life useful to humanity. I believe that education is a lifelong process, and the greatest university is the home. That my success as a teacher is proportional to those qualities of mind and spirit that give me welcome entrance to the homes of the families that I serve. Because I believe these things, I am an extension professional.
Believe in people and their hopes, their aspirations and their faith. I believe that education, of which extension work is an essential part, is basic in stimulating individual initiative, self-determination, and leadership. I believe that these are the keys to democracy, and that people, when given facts they understand, will act not only in their self-interest, but also in the interest of society. I believe in intellectual freedom to search for and present the truth without bias and with courteous tolerance towards the views of others. Because I believe these things, I am an extension professional.
Time for the market report. Prices on the downswing.
That's right, Mike, but not too dramatically. We'll get into it, but first, the numbers. Let's take a look at last week's biggest gains and losses. And then in our row report, what's making waves in grain? And finally, in livestocks, what's moving those markets? So, markets closed last week on the downswing. Both row crops and livestock affected. Let's take a look. Last week's biggest gain, corn, up 15.5 cents, and over 3.25% increase from the previous week. Last week's biggest loss, lean hogs, down nearly 3.25 cents, a 3.10 decrease from the previous week. So, row crops down in price. One reason is stocks. We appear to have plenty, at least according to the last WASDE report, and that's affected prices. So, what's a farmer to do business-wise when they're sitting on a good harvest? Market analyst Chris Robinson gives his advice.
You have a lot of opportunity this year if you count the number of days or weeks where we were north of $6 corn. Our actually high was that June-July spike. I think a lot of people thought, here we go, we're going to go back to $7. And so it just depends. If somebody did some marketing, you had opportunities there. If you've done nothing, you do the math. 629 minus 461, it's $1.60 and change. That's a revenue bump if you did nothing. So now people are going to store it. The question is, do you have to pay for storage? Is it on-farm storage? There's some carry in the market, but it depends on how much it costs you to store that corn. We were talking about interest rates. A lot of wheat producers are looking at carry. Again, but it depends on your balance sheet. It depends on what it costs you to store, because farmers will hold it until they absolutely positively have to sell it. And I think moving ahead, people are going to wait and see. Are we going to get a South American market where we get a bump up and they get a chance to hopefully this time sell into the rally instead of waiting? The time for expensive insurance is when we're at $6.30, $6. That's when you had something worth protecting. But at $5 or $4.60, I think you keep a kind of a disaster floor under it and look for rallies to sell. If you don't have to pay for storage, you're in a different group than somebody does. I think if you have to pay for storage, you have to do the math. That makes sense. So you could see a capitulation here. It's the farmers that will have to sell, and I can tell you who's going to be pulling the trigger on a lot of these sales. It's going to be their bankers, because these gentlemen and ladies are going to have to go in and say, hey, I'm looking at an operating loan for next year. And they're going to say, okay, well, where are your assets? What are they worth? Not what were they worth in July? It's what they are worth right now. So I think that's going to be the decision. It's going to be a business decision.
In the livestock markets, things also working on the market side instead of the producer side. Lots of speculation about policies and new technologies. Analysts Ernie Goss and Chris Robinson explain.
Right now, there are concerns about more domestic. For example, Iowa's pork production is very important. #1 pork producing state in the U.S. And of course, Proposition 12. And the bankers report every month, get reports about, well, concern about hog production, concerned about selling. And Massachusetts, of course, now has implemented some proposition. I don't know what it's called in Massachusetts, but nonetheless, there's more of domestic. That's what the bankers are telling me and us, Creighton University, about what's going on. Yeah, there's significant loss in just as a result of just regular day-to-day production sales. So that I couldn't give you the exact quote, but it was not positive. And the reports, particularly in livestock, has been more about pork production or hogs, and not so much about cattle.
I would say this: if you're looking at these prices, 170 is better than 140. So rather than worry about, are we going to go back to rally another 15, 20 bucks higher, make sure that you don't let it get any worse, and stop the kind of the monkey business of trying to say, well, this is the low, this is the high. I think the market's going to continue to move. And we talked earlier about the overall economy. The first thing people do, if this is going to be a soft landing or a hard landing, and again, it depends. The first thing people will do, if they're experiencing a hard landing, they're not going to buy steak.
We're talking about 7, the Magnificent 7, leading the whole stock market. If you look at the Russell 2000, a small company index, it's not up. It's up 1 to 2%. I mean, the stock market's not the economy, nor are these 7 companies the stock market either. I mean, in other words, it's over. Investors are going they're too far in, I think. In other words, this is too much optimism for so little. I mean, I'm not saying the economy is not in a recession. I'm just saying this market is overheated, at least those 7 stocks. And this evening, one of this NVIDIA will be announcing, and based upon AI, artificial intelligence. I was there when we had browser. Internet was going to do well, it didn't at first. It took time. This is going to take time. We're getting too excited about something that's it's not going to happen for a while. The positive impacts of that.
And that's it for a deeper look into the markets. With harvest nearly done, we're into the winter business and next year planning months. Mike?
Thanks, Zach. Needless to say, insects can drive a farmer to frustration as an otherwise healthy crop is decimated by an army of tiny invaders. Now a new spin on old technology may have the backs of producers. Colleen Bradford Krantz has this story.
Fence requires
ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
This launch isn't shooting for the moon or a distant planet. No rocket boosters are needed. And the passengers inside? Insects.
We developed, in collaboration with USDA, a drone-based system for releasing sterile insects.
On a September day in western Michigan, the insects traveling during this routine drone launch by M3 Agriculture Technologies are codling moths.
6,400 moths.
The bane of existence for many pear and apple orchard owners.
Codling moth is really the worm in the apple. It's the primary pest. It's always been a nuisance for growers for the last 200 years in North America. It's the predominant pest worldwide. I think the only place where codling moth is not an issue or has not established is in Japan and some parts of Asia.
Codling moths have long been a foe at Hayden Farms of Pasco, Washington. But when the apple and cherry producers switched a half dozen years ago to organic apple practices, meaning synthetic pesticides were no longer an option, they struggled to keep control.
The major pest in apples by far is codling moth. And so when we first converted, we were clean. Coming from conventional to organic, we didn't have any codling moth problems. Then we had a neighbor that was organic and kind of got in trouble with the farm, and his control went to heck. A lot of problems, and those problems drifted over to us. We tried every means possible to control codling moths.
Hayden says they ultimately needed an answer beyond just natural oils and an insect virus spray. Those worked, but oils can only be applied a few times before harming the trees, and the viral spray needed to be reapplied repeatedly, driving their pesticide spending up. The viral spray also had to be consumed by the insects, meaning they would leave tiny bite holes in the fruit, known as stings. Inspired by Washington State University's research into sterilized insects as biocontrols in orchards, Hayden decided to give it a try, hiring M3.
We were really shocked the first year. We saw real good results. We still had some stings that first year with it. Since then, we have really been very clean. This year, I might have seen a couple stings all season in 125 acres.
Although drone delivery of insects is relatively new, sterile insect technique, or SIT, is not. SIT is a type of biological control, an alternative or supplement to chemicals, when managing agricultural pests like codling moth.
The insects that we release are sterilized. They're sterilized with ionizing radiation. And it damages their DNA to the point to where they're still viable as far as they're able to fly and they're able to act as insects. But when they mate with another insect, with a native insect that's out in the target environment, they will lay an infertile egg.
USDA has been using sterile insect strategies for decades, most notably when airplanes dropped sterilized pink bollworms, an insect that once devastated cotton crops all over the South. In 2018, USDA announced it had successfully eradicated pink bollworm.
The pink bollworm is officially eradicated.
Present in the U.S. ecosystem for more than a century.
Sterile insect technology is not a standalone technology in most cases. In the pink bollworm, we had a variety of technologies that we used. We hit pink bollworm with everything we had. You have to have a thorough knowledge of the insect's biology, its field behavior, and how it interacts with the host and all of its natural enemies.
After being awarded a grant, M3 began working with USDA in 2014 on developing a rapid response system in case of any small breakouts of pink bollworm. 4 years later, the Dayton, Ohio-based company got to work figuring out how to safely ship and store sterilized Mexican fruit flies, lady beetles, codling moths, and other insects from insect-rearing facilities before attempting to drop sometimes reluctant bugs from drones into treetops. The company designed its own drones and release devices.
When we went up to Washington and started releasing sterile codling moth, then we treated 50 acres. In 2019, we treated 1,200 acres, and that was our first year of commercial sales. Now we are at 4,000 acres in 2022 and growing quite nicely.
The company, now with 10 employees, has moved away from its previous dependence on government grants. Besides contracts in Washington, M3 now has customers in California, Idaho, and Michigan. Part of the reason for the growing enthusiasm among producers is that insects, just like weeds, develop resistance to pesticides.
For the majority of crop, especially apples and pears, there's no new chemical formulations coming online. There's no more being developed. It takes generally 10 years of a long pipeline, millions of dollars to develop, different chemical formulations. We think that methods such as biocontrol using insects and such, those are going to become more and more popular.
I think there are a lot of options with SIT, and I think it depends a lot on the pest you're talking about and the crop and just the setting for exactly where and what you have to work with.
Altitude is 30.
Various studies estimate the value of natural biological control of native pests in U.S. crops at between $1.7 billion and $5.5 billion. A Canadian facility is the only large-scale insectary rearing sterilized codling moths. Crumpets expects demand to grow for other insects, especially predatory mites that feed on two-spotted spider mites, which are harmful to crops like hops and strawberries. Also, green lacewing, which eat other harmful aphids, show promise for many specialty crops, including fruits, nuts, and marijuana.
The big issue that we face is the supply of insects long term.
A whole new meaning for the words bug out, a real success story. Well, next week, another success story in the Mississippi Delta, a Farm Week Encore.
In part of the Delta, long considered a food desert, a town that played a prominent role in civil rights history. A grocery store comes to Marks, Mississippi. It was a long-awaited follow-up to our news coverage of a grand opening that puts smiles on the faces of everyone involved.
And it showcases yet again just how extension matters. All that and more next time on Farm Week.
Remember, if you missed a story, look for past episodes of Farm Week on our website at farmweek.tv.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and YouTube. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.